Things don't look too good for the South Korean economy. The government revised down its growth outlook for 2019, citing weak exports and sluggish investment. While U.S. China trade tensions have waned for now, Japan's recent decision to restrict exports of key materials to South Korea has emerged as another threat. Today, we go in depth into the prospects of the Korean economy in the latter half of this year. And for that, Professor Shin Sang-hyup from Kyung Hee University joins me in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So the government has slashed the country's growth forecast to between 2.4 and 2.5%. Now it's down from the previous forecast between 2.6 and 2.7%. Did you see this downward revision coming, and what does this mean for the Korean economy?
Well, as you know very well, over the last 7 months, Korean semiconductors exports recorded the decrease. And because of the over 1 year longer the trade war between China and USA, the global trading circumstances has been closer to more protectionistic ones. So under such a kind of circumstances, Korean the exports, as I already explained, faced serious challenges, difficulties. And another one is the Korean domestic consumptions has been reduced dramatically over the several months because of those kind of things. I mean, uncertainty in the external economic circumstances plus sluggish domestic economic circumstances resulted in those kind of changes of the forecast economic growth rate.
So we have a lot of downside economic risks ahead. The government also laid out measures earlier today to breathe new life into the Korean economy, and a key part of that is to offer tax incentives to spur investment, which in turn it hopes will boost consumption as well as job growth. What's your assessment of the government's plans, and was there anything else that stood out to you?
I think the direction of the measures seems to be okay. I mean, to attract more investment from the private sector, particularly investment in the plants and equipment, I think it is really important. And also promote the domestic consumption, consumptions of Koreans in the Korean market. Well, the directions of these measures seems to be okay, but I don't think the measures are enough. That means that by giving some incentives, some tax-related incentives, I doubt whether the private sector could increase their investment in plants and equipment. So I think the government should take more bold and more aggressive measures to promote investment. I mean, increase the investment from the private sector, such as lower the corporate tax rates. I mean, those kind of things has been discussed for a long time, between the government and private sector, but it was not accepted by the government, the demands from the private sector. So by accepting the asking or demands from the private sector, the government should make improve the circumstances, make the better circumstances the private sectors could do business. So I think, I think it's not enough. Then the government should have to consider one more time to make more aggressive and more bold the measures to boost the domestic economy and to promote investment.
Something that stood out to me when the government is actually downwarding its forecast was that it actually had a brighter prospect for the job market. Can you explain why that is the case if the economy has been downwarded?
Well, in fact, if the economy is downwarded, as I already explained before, people do not want to spend money. And then if the people do not spend more money, then less amount of money will go to the private sector. And then if the private sector could not make the income, then they could not give more money to the workers in the form of the salaries. So we call it vicious circle, And then on the top of this kind of the sluggish domestic circumstances, in fact, because of the uncertainty in the external market, well, people are hesitant to use the money, make investment. So these kind of the factors, made people not to spend money, made the private sector refrain themselves from making more investment. So without increasing the investment in the plants or the equipment, well, we cannot expect the revitalization globalization of sluggish, the economies. And then, well, if the economy is getting better, people want, change their mind, and they want to spend more money. Then what I want to say is that the positive circle can be changed. But the one point which I want to underline is that changing those kind of circumstances is not that much easy. So we have to consider by doing what we can change we can start a change in the economies domestically and externally.
Now, another concern at the moment is Japan's recent decision to restrict exports of 3 key materials used in semiconductor and display productions, which is set to take effect starting tomorrow. Now, there are also reports that Japan is considering removing South Korea from a list of so-called white countries, which will face minimum trade restrictions. Do you think there is a specific reason why they're targeting this product?
Well, the Korean government right now insist that that's because of the Seoul's, Korea's Supreme Court, ruling. The Seoul's Supreme Court ordered the Japanese companies such as Nihon Steel and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Sumitomo Metal Corporations to compensate South Korean the victims of forced labor during the Japanese the colonial era. But Japanese government, the Prime Minister Abe said that the South Korean government does not keep the promise which they made between two governments. So because of these kind of things, they don't have to respect, they give some privileges to the Korean government, the Korean economies, which can enjoy some special treatment from the Japanese policy. So the two governments, explain very different, the situation with very different reasons. So I think but everybody knows, many foreign the governments recognize that why Japanese government made such a kind of decision. So I think, but what I want to add it up is that because of the two different stance between two governments looking at this the situation, it will not easy for us to find a solution of this situation.
So many are seeing it as retaliatory action. How much of a damage do you actually expect this to have on South Korean industries?
Well, we have to wait and see, but when you look at the imports and exports of these 3 high-tech materials, the Japanese accounts for 90% of global market of the regists, and then the plumate. Well, they accounted for 90% of the global market. And in case of the etching gas, they accounted for 70%. So what I want to emphasize is that Korean industries, companies are heavily dependent on the high-tech materials, those high-tech materials imported from Japan. So if Japan, tighten the restrictions on the exports of these high-tech materials to Seoul, it will take up to 90 days, So certainly it can be some of the challenges for the Korean the companies because that the semiconductor chips and this is certainly one of the main exporting items, which means this is really important for the Korean economy. But because of Japanese economic sanctions on this, the items, products, definitely Korea will get the damages. But we have to think about the value-added chain of these materials. That means that for the Japanese the companies producing these high-tech materials, the Korean market is the #1 market. So if they cannot export these materials to Korean market, that will have also the difficulties in their business activities. Particularly if the situation goes on for a while, definitely those Japanese industries will get some damages in their businesses. And another thing which I want to emphasize is that, there are many Japanese companies who use the Korean-made components. The components made by Korean companies used these 3 high-tech materials. So if they restrict the export of these high-tech materials to Korea, then Korean exports, these components, used by these high-tech materials to Japan will be also hurted. So on the long-term basis, Japanese economy will get some damages. And this will be the case for the USA and Chinese producers, because many American the companies and Chinese companies have used Korean-made components to make the final the products, finalize to make the final goods. So on the long-term basis, it can be, the negative factors not only for the Korean economy, but also Japanese, American and Chinese economy. So there will be some pressure from international community, including USA and China, to change the situation facing the Korea and Japan.
So the Korean government has begun a review of the legal grounds to file a complaint to the World Trade Organization. If and when that happens, what are the chances that the ruling will favor Seoul?
Well, we have to wait and see, but I think the results of the investigation of this case is important, but not very important. Why? Because normally it takes about 2 years to investigate this case, to make a final ruling. Then during this investigation period, what we have concern is that Japanese government will restrict the exports of these high-tech materials to Korea continuously. And second point we have to concern is that even after 2 years, suppose that the ruling will favor for Korea, but the Japanese, Japanese government does not have any the responsibility to compensate for the damages which Korean companies would get because of the Japanese economic sanction to Korea. So actually, a WTO will not be a good solution to solve this problem. What I want to emphasize is that I think I don't know whether it will work perfectly or efficiently, but I do recommend the government to use the diplomatic solution. I think a diplomatic solution seems to be the only remaining a few ways to solve this situation. Otherwise, we cannot avoid the trade war with Japan.
Yeah, so the South Korean government is mulling multiple ways and will plan to unveil the measures soon. Separately, the Korean government announced today that it plans to invest $5 billion to develop homegrown high-tech materials to ease the nation's burden or dependence on Japan. What did you make of this announcement?
Well, certainly this is the good measure on the long-term basis. But what I want to emphasize is that this is not helpful for us to solve the current situation, in the relationship with Japan. I do want to recommend the government why they prepare this kind of strategy before, in advance, before we having such a kind of situation.
Shifting gears slightly, while that remains as a risk as well, other uncertainties linger for the Korean economy in the second half of this year. What are the prospects and what are some variables that could impact the South Korean economy?
Well, as I already mentioned very briefly, the trade war between USA and China is going on, even though at the Osaka G20 summit, two leaders, USA President Mr. Trump and then Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping decide to return to the negotiation table. But nothing changed. They will return to the negotiation table, but I doubt how they could make the productive outcomes at the trade negotiation. So what I want to say is that because of trade war between these two economic giants, the international trading circumstances could be less favorable for the international trade. And second one is the Brexit. Brexit is as you know well, this is one of the hot issues in Europe. European economy is the second largest economy in the world. I mean, in some cases, in terms of the population, is larger than USA. And so European Union has some uncertainty because of the Brexit in the economy. And another one is the USA government interest rate policy, because USA government, particularly Federal Reserve, which is central bank of the USA, they do consider increasing interest rates. If they increase interest rates, that means that a huge amount of money will be withdrawn from the developing market, including Korea. Then that will affect the value of the Korean currency against the USA dollar, which means that Korean exports will be hurted. So those kind of things will be, I think these things can be the negative factors which will be the challenging factors to the Korean economy.
Just a short question before we let you go. The government is seeking to have its supplementary budget passed as soon as possible in order to prop up the economy. How much of a positive impact do you think this will actually have?
It is needed, actually, but I do think it's not enough. As we already know that if the Congress passed the supplementary budget bill, and Korea could achieve the 2.5 and 2.6% economic growth rates. And that means that much supplementary budget seems to be very needed urgently. But I think that the amount of the supplementary budget, it does not seem to be enough. But I think something is better than nothing, And then the most important thing at the moment, which I want to emphasize to the Korean government, is that the Korean government just try to streamline the inefficiency in implementing policies, and then to prepare the Korean economy on the long-term basis. Otherwise, we will not be able to efficiently overcome the challenges facing us at the moment.
Okay, that's where we'll wrap things up today. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. Don't forget to join us at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for watching and goodbye.